You see, he explained, picking up his pipe again, both pumps work at one time in fact. I should say all four, because this plan is duplicated on the English side. On both ends, then, a train is gently pushed in by an electric locomotive. A car at a time goes through the gate, so that there is a cushion of air between each car. The same thing happens at Liverpool. Now, when the due train comes out of the suction tube, it goes on out the gate, but the air behind it travels right on around and comes in behind the train that is leaving. But how are you assured that it will not stall somewhere? It won't be likely to, with pressure pumps going behind it and suction pumps pulling from in front. We can always put extra power on if necessary. Thus far, the road has worked perfectly. How much power do you need to send it through? Under normal conditions, our trains have been averaging about 50 tons, and for that weight we have found that a pound pressure is quite sufficient. Now, taking the tunnel S length as 4,000 miles, and the tube width 11 1/4 feet each, and working this out, we have 3,020,000 cubic feet of free air per minute, or 29 cubic feet of compressed air, which would use about 70,000 horsepower on the air compressor. But isn't the speed rather dizzy? Not any more dizzy, Bob, than those old-fashioned money-carrying machines that the department stores used to use. That is in comparison to size. The average speed is about 360 feet a second. Of course, the train is allowed to slow down toward the end of its run, even before it hits the braking machinery beyond the gate. But how much pressure did you say would be put on the back of the diaphragm? Remember that each car has a flat disc on the back that fits fairly tightly to the tube. The pressure on the back is less than 7 tons. However, the disc does not fit tight. There are several leaks. For instance, the cars are, as you know, run on the principle of the monorail, with a guiding rail on each side. The grooves for the rails, with their 3 rollers, are in each car. There is a slight leakage of air here. You used the turbo type of blower, didn't you? Had to, because of the noise. We put some silencing devices on that, and yet we could not kill all of the racket. However, a new invention has come up that we will make use of soon now. But I can't understand, Dutch, why you seemed so put out when I announced my intention of going to Europe via the tube. Why? I can remember the day when that would have tickled you to death. You followed the digging of the tube, didn't you? Yes, of course. You remember the volcano and lava seams? Yes. Well, I do not believe that the crack was a pressure crevice. If it had been, we were far enough below the ocean floor to have partly relieved the situation by the unusually solid building of the tube. The tremendous shell of this new type of specially hardened metal and the rich concrete that was used as filling, that was one job no one slipped up on. I remember how you watched it. Yet the crack has widened, Bob, since the tube was completed. How can you be certain? By the amount of water coming through the drain pipes. But you said that once more it was stationary. Yes, and that is the very thing that proves, I believe, the nature of the crack. I don't follow you. Why, it isn't a crack at all, Bob. It is an earthquake fault. Good heavens, you don't mean... Yes, I do. I mean that the next time the land slips, our little tube will be twisted up like a piece of string, or crushed like an eggshell. That always was a rocky bit of land. I thought in going that far north, though, that we had missed the main line of activity. I mean the disturbances that had once wiped out a whole nation. If your scientists are correct, then you mean that it is only a matter of time. Yes, and I have been informed by one expert that the old volcanic activity is not dead either. So that is what has stolen away your laugh. Well, I am one of the engineers, and they won't suspend the service. Fate has played an ugly trick on you, Dutch, and through your own dreams too. However, You have made me decide to go by the tube." He took his pipe out of his mouth and stared at me. "Sooner or later the tube will be through, and I have never been across. Nothing risked a dull life. Mine has been altogether too dull. I am now most certainly going by the tube." A bit of the old fire lit up his eyes. "Same old Bob," he grunted as I rose, and then he grasped my hand with a grin. "Good luck, my boy, on your journey, and may old Vulcan be out on a vacation when you pass his door." Thus we said goodbye. I did not know then that I would never see him again. That he also took the train night in order to make one last plea to the International Committee, and so laid down his life with the passengers for whom he had pleaded. It was with many conflicting thoughts, however, that I hurried to the great terminus that fatal night, where, after being ticketed, photographed and tabulated by an efficient army of clerks, I found myself in due time being ushered to my car of the train. For the benefit of those who have never ridden upon the famous flyer, I could describe the cars no better than to say that, coming upon them by night, as I did, they looked like a gigantic shiny worm of strange shape through whose tiny portholes of heavy glass in the sides glowed its luminous vitals. I was pompously shown to the front car, which very much resembled a tremendous cartridge's. Did all of the other segments of this great glowworm, having dismissed the porter with a tip and the suspicion that my having the front car was the work of my friend, who was willing to give me my money's worth of thrill, and that the porter was aware of this, I stowed away my bags and started to get ready for bed. I had no sooner taken off my coat than the door was opened, and an old fellow with a mass of silver hair peered in at me. "I beg your pardon, sir, but I understand you have engaged this car alone." "Yes, I can get no other accommodations tonight. You have an extra berth here, and I must get to Paris tomorrow. I will pay you well." I smiled. "Take it." I was beginning to feel lonesome. Anyway, he bowed gravely and ordered the porter to bring in his things. I decided he was a musician. Only artists go in for such lovely hair. But he undressed in dignified silence, not casting so much as another glance in my direction, while, on my part, I also forgot his presence when, looking through the porthole, I realized that the train had begun to move. Soon the drone of the propelling engines began to make itself heard. Then the train began to dip down, and the steel sides of the entrance became too high for me to see over. My friend of the silver hair had already turned off the light, and now I knew by the darkness that we had entered the tube. For some time I lay awake thinking of Dutch and the ultimate failure of his life stream as he had outlined it to me, and then I sank into a deep, dreamless sleep. I was awakened by a terrible shock that hurled me up against the side of the compartment. A dull, red glow poured through the porthole, lighting up the interior with a weird, bloody reflection. I crept painfully up to the porthole and looked out. The strangest sight that man has ever looked upon met my eyes. The side of the wall had blown out into a gigantic cavern, and with it the rest of the cars had rolled down the bluff, a tangled, twisted mass of steel. My car had almost passed by, and now it still stuck in the tube, even though the last porthole through which I peered seemed to be suspended in air. But it was not the wrecked cars from which rose such wails of despair and agony that held my attention, but the cavern itself, for it was not really a cave, but a vast underground city whose wide, marble streets stretched away to an inferno of flame and lava. By the terrible light was lit up a great white palace with its gold-tipped scrolls, and closer to me, the golden temple of the sun, with its tiers of lustrous yellow stairs worn by the feet of many generations. Above the stairs towered the great statue of a man on horseback. He was dressed in a sort of tunic, and in his uplifted arm he carried a scroll as if for the people to read. His face was turned toward me, and I marveled even in that wild moment that the unknown sculptor could have caught such an expression of appeal. I can see the high intellectual brow as if it were before me at this moment, the level, sympathetic eyes, and the firm chin. Then something moving caught my eyes, and I swear I saw a child, a living child, coming from the burning city, running madly, breathlessly from a wave of glowing lava that threatened to engulf him at any moment. In spite of all the ridicule that has been showered upon me, still declare that the child did not come from the wreckage, and that he wore a tunic similar to the one of the statue, and not the torn bit of a nightgown or sheet. He was some distance from me, but I could plainly see his expression of wild distraction as he began to climb those gleaming stairs. Strangely lustrous in the weird light was that worn stairway of gold, the ancient metal of the sun. With the slowness of one about to faint, he dragged himself up, while his breath seemed to be torn from his throat in agonizing gasps. Behind him, the glowing liquid splashed against the steps, and the yellow metal of the sun began to drip into its fiery cauldron. The child reached the leg of the horse and clung there. Then suddenly the whole scene began to shake as if I had been looking at a mirage, while just behind my car I had a flashing glimpse in that lurid light of an emerald-green deluge, bursting in like a dark sky of solid water, and in that split second, before a crushing blow upon my back, even through that tangle of bed, knocked me into unconsciousness, I seemed to hear again the hopeless note in the voice of my friend as he said, "An earthquake fault." After what seemed to me eons of strange, buzzing noises and peculiar lights, I at last made out the objects around me as those of a hospital. Men with serious faces were watching me. I have since been told that I babbled incoherently about saving the little fellow, and other equally incomprehensible murmurings. From them I learned that the train the other way was washed out, a tangled mass of wreckage, just like my car. Both terminus stations wrecked utterly, and no one found alive except myself. So, although I am to be a hopeless cripple, yet I am not sorry that the skill and untiring patience of the great English surgeon, Dr. Thompson, managed to nurse back the feeble spark of my life through all those weeks that I hung on the borderland. For if he had not, the world never would have known. As it is, I wonder over the events of that night, as if it had not been an experience at all but a wild, weird dream. Even the gentleman with the mass of silver hair is a mystery, for he was never identified, and yet in my mind's recesses I can still hear his cultured voice asking about the extra berth and mentioning his pressing mission to Paris, and somehow he gives the last touch of strangeness to the events of that fatal night, and in my mind he becomes a part of it, no less than the child on the stairs, the burning inferno that lit the background, and the great statue of that unknown hero, who held out his scroll for a moment in that lurid light like a symbol from the sunken city of the dead.